joy fill our days. O Master, may thy wisdom guide our ways. That time has come for us to see that there's but one reality upon the earth and high above. The truth that all was made from love. A love that calls to us to fly above the hills, above the sky, above the storms, above the pain. A land where peace and laughter reign. Oh, Master, may thy joy fill our days. Oh, Master, may thy wisdom guide our ways. Guide all our hopes and all our dreams. Pass every glow that only seems into the light, the inner sun, into the truth that we're all one. Help us to find in every hour, in every thought, in every flower, a joy that spans eternity, the truth that makes us ever free. Oh, Master, may thy joy fill our days. Oh, Master, may thy wisdom guide our ways. Oh, Master, may thy joy fill our days. Oh, Master, may thy wisdom guide our ways.
Hope everyone is doing well today. Glad you could make it. This is from Rays of the One Light. This is our reading each week of where taken from the teachings of Paramahansa Yoganandaji. He compares the Bible and the Bhagavad Gita. He chose these two scriptures. He said he could have chosen all of the scriptures, but he chose to focus on the Bible and the Bhagavad Gita. His mission was more about blending and utilizing the most positive aspects from the West and the most positive aspects from the East, and blending the two together. So that's how this book came about. Swamiji wrote it, of course, but these are Master's teachings. This week is called, How Should We Meet Our Tests? Truth is one and eternal. Realize oneness with it in your deathless self within. The following commentary is based on the teachings of Paramahansa Yogananda. Last week we considered the temptation of Jesus in the wilderness by Satan after his baptism by John. We discussed the question, does Satan exist? All of us experience temptation of one kind or another in our lives. Some of us frequently, others only occasionally. Whether temptation comes to us from our own subconscious or from outside ourselves is secondary to the fact that it does come and that we must deal with it. More importantly, then, is the question how to deal with it. In fact, how to deal with tests of any kind. Martin Luther flung an ink pot at the devil who had appeared to test him. A dark stain on the wall of Luther's cell is pointed out to tourists in support of this story. Unfortunately, our trials are not often so summarily dismissed. Martin Luther was a German saint, and when he was being tested, meaning Satan literally appeared to him and was trying to make him lose all faith in God. And so the story goes that when Satan appeared to him, he grabbed an ink pot and threw it at him. And so in Germany, where his church was, when tourists go through, they can see the ink from the ink pot. And I think Martin Luther, does anyone know, was he in the 1200s or 1300s? He was a while ago, hundreds of years ago. So it's something that the ink pot stain is there for the past few hundred years to show that Satan tries to get us off of our path of believing in God and believing in our faith, and yet with all his willpower he drove him out. So that's why the story is in this. Jesus, during his temptations in the wilderness, overcame them and thereby set an example for all time by clinging the more determinedly to God. As Paramahansa Yogananda used to say, darkness cannot be driven out of a room with a stick. Once you turn on the light, however, the darkness will vanish as though it had never been. Jesus manifested this principle. The Bible tells us therefore that at last the devil leaveth him, and behold, angels came and ministered unto him. In the Bhagavad Gita, the point is clarified further by the added explanation that there are three qualities in human nature: sattvic, or spiritually elevating; rajasic, or ego activating; and tamasic, or spiritually darkening. It is this triune aspect of human nature that the third chapter refers to with the words, "As fire is hidden by smoke, as a mirror is dulled by rust, and as an embryo is enclosed in the womb, so is the indwelling self enveloped by desire." Yogananda explained that each of these examples describes one of the qualities of gunas. Sattva guna, that which elevates our consciousness, can be freed of any identity with ego by a little puff of meditation and right affirmation. Rajoguna, which embroils the ego in restless activity, can be worked off with a little more and a little longer effort. Tamoguna, embracing as it does such mental states as laziness and stupidity, can only be outgrown in time, since it inhibits even the desire for self-improvement. The example Jesus gave us was intended more for those in whom sattva guna is predominant. But if you yourself find elements in your consciousness that resist even the effort to cling to God in prayer and meditation, don't despair. Patience, as it has been well said, is the fastest path to God. As long as your efforts take you steadfastly in the right direction, you will come out right in time. Remember Yogananda's words, "A saint is a sinner who never gave up." If, however, your nature impels you, even against your will, to move in the wrong direction, toward ego desires and away from God, strive at least to detach yourself mentally from your wrong actions, which are induced by habit. The time will come when their own stored up energy will tire and diminish. At that time, if you have not contributed to that energy by your consenting will, you will find it possible at last to redirect your energies more constructively. Thus, through Holy Scripture, God has spoken to mankind.
To begin with a poem from Whispers from Eternity by Paramahansa Yogananda. This is the demand for the enjoyment of everything with the joy of God. O Spirit, teach me to enjoy Thee in spirit, that I may enjoy the world and my earthly duties with Thy joy. O Spirit, help me to train my senses that they enjoy only good things. Teach me to enjoy earthly pleasures with Thy joy. Save me above all, from the slightest touch of negativity, doubt, and cynicism. It's so beautiful that Master ends that poem that way, because very often on the spiritual path, if we think of it in sort of black and white terms, that these are the good things that a good devotee does, and these are the bad things that a good devotee doesn't do, and so on. We can get very caught up in external behaviors, external rules. I did this, therefore I'm good and I've proven it, or I did this and that means that I'm not as good as I thought I was, and so on. He does say, help my senses to enjoy only good things. And so partly that doesn't mean that I'll only enjoy the good things and then I'll be miserable with the bad things. Rather, it means that help me to refine my tastes so that I seek out only good things. You know, you can think of it in a simple way in terms of when we're young and we love lots of sweets, for example, and you know, you get to eat all the sweets you want, and well, you don't, because there's always these policemen running around saying you can't have this sweet and that sweet and so on. And but why? Because it makes us unwell. Or it makes us crazy. I was a school teacher, and we had children who didn't seem to understand why after lunchtime, when they had the sugar drinks and the 5 sugar cookies, that then they ended the playtime in tears or in a fight because, you know, the sugar made them nuts. And in my classroom, I got to make the rules, and so we would say, you know, avoid heavily sugary foods. This was a school policy, not only for the sake of nutrition, but the sake of your teacher's sanity, and so on. And so the children retaliated by saying, you know, it's my birthday, whenever it was, and so I have cupcakes for everyone, and you have to let us eat them. And so I said, that's perfectly fine. You can have them at 2:59, and school ends at 3. And so they would have the cupcake and get all loaded up, and out the door they went to their dear parents, and so on. Because the sugar made them nuts. But when you get older, you can do whatever you want regarding this, in terms of, this is again so we don't lose the thread, the senses enjoying good things, not bad things. I remember as an adult I was really hungry, and it was dinner. We were about to have dinner like in 20 minutes, but I was just too hungry, and I was at a store. And I said to myself, seeing all the lovely candies, I can have candy before dinner. Because I had grown up, you know, of course, saying you can't have sweets before dinner because it will spoil your appetite. And I just said, ha ha ha, no one can stop me now. And so I got the candy and I ate it and I enjoyed it. And then I lost my appetite. And then I was eating at a friend's house, so I had to eat because, of course, to be polite. And then I had this horrible stomachache. And so it was like with all my newfound freedom and wisdom, I completely misused it. In other words, there was a reason why the restrictions were put on me. But since that time, I haven't followed that practice again, because I learned from my own experience, not just from being told. And so it's sort of like, don't do this, it'll hurt. I'll do it anyway. Ow, it hurts. Now I won't do it. And so this is the purpose of our tests, to bring understanding. And it doesn't always mean that we didn't understand before, but somehow we have to understand on a deeper and deeper and deeper level. Some tests are so central to our being and so intense that you can get about 50 lessons out of them. And by the time you're on lesson 35, it's like, okay, God, I think I've got all the lessons that can be squeezed out of this experience. And he says, 15 more. Just keep on going. And so we want our senses to enjoy healthy things, good things, and so on, because they give us energy, because they give us joy, and so on. These restrictions that are put on us, like my parents were trying to encourage me not to eat sweets before dinner, was actually for my own sake. In fact, that's why so many of these rules are given, because it's for our own sake. But if we just accept them blindly, or if we take them rigidly, or we follow them perfectly, thinking that therefore it proves I'm pure, because I do what pure people do, well, you know, it's a step better to do that than not, sure, but the real purity is of the heart. That's why it says in virtually every religion, God watches the heart. What do we become through these following of these rules inside? What do we become through our tests? Have we learned from our tests? And so on. So in time we learn to prefer, more sattvic foods, for example, more sattvic enjoyments and so on, because they give us more joy and they don't drain energy away from us. And also when you spend so much time in meditation trying to get your consciousness to go higher, and you develop a taste for that because you feel the enjoyment of that, then we start to prefer less those things that automatically pull our consciousness down. Because we say, look, here I am trying. Why would I make my job harder in meditation? Or, alternatively, I just enjoy being up. Why would I just go crashing back down? Especially on the beginning of the spiritual path, which is like the first 70 years. I'm kidding, but still, so in a certain way it is that way. We find old habits falling away. And it's sometimes hard to explain to old friends. Well, why don't you do this? Why don't you like muraka sandwiches the way you used to like them, and so on? I think somebody's saying, oh, I still do. It's fine. Don't worry. But in other words, some of our habits change. It's hard for us to explain to people who haven't had that similar uplift of consciousness and developed a taste for it. So again, this is a good way to overcome such things. Master said, replace, in a certain way, he said, replace a pleasure with a greater pleasure. A pleasure that's not really all that great, but you're trying to overcome. Replace it with a greater one, rather than just merely resisting or forcing or saying, no, no, no. You can do that. And to some extent, we need to use willpower and intensity. But at the same time, we have to remember what it's for. What is the purpose? Is to find God. That's it. The purpose of everything is to find God. The purpose of yoga, meditation, self-discipline, joyful chanting. It's only to find God. It's not an end in itself. And it's not something that we should rest at. I do this, therefore I'm spiritual enough. Or sometimes we can get so caught up in what we're doing that we start to think that's the purpose. So for example, if we're working really hard and serving and giving so much to people and doing everything that we can, and this includes our families, it includes our jobs, and we're finding that the sleep is getting less and less as we serve more and more, if we've started to lose our joy, or we started to feel empty or dry inside, then it's time to recalibrate. It's time to reconnect and say, wait a minute, what is it all for? I'm serving, I'm giving, it's fine. It's karma yoga, it's fine. But we have to say, but is that how I'm feeling? Am I feeling the karma yoga, or am I just feeling the karma? And so it doesn't mean necessarily that we can say, okay, time out, 2 weeks vacation. Maybe we can, maybe we can't. Sometimes you can get away with 2 hours vacation, or even 1 day vacation. Just say, look, you actually can take a break. Most of us can't go non-stop for 7 consecutive months without taking at least a half day of rest. And it's important to do so. And if ever your mind says, not for me, I don't need it, just remember Krishna saying in the Gita, the yogi is not he who works too little or too much. And sort of, I understand the too little part, but can you ever work too much? Some of you may not have this problem, but some of us do. And so it's just, you certainly can. If you lose your joy, you're working too much. If you lose your health, you're working too much. And it may say, well, but what choice do I have? The choice we have is to say, hey, God, can you do something? And God says, finally, I was waiting for an opening. Meanwhile, we're so busy trying to, keep the Earth spinning in its orbit. It's just like, look, it's going just fine. And so we have to learn sometimes outwardly to delegate or to share or to leave things unfinished. Very often the world will end if we forget to do this last thing, we think. But it doesn't. If only for the sake of the other people, the world doesn't end, and so it's fine. And so if that joy is missing, if that energy is too depleted, or if we've been missing the point. We were in a satsang once in one of our communities that we were living in, and we were sort of speaking generally about how the direction of the community was going and so on, which was all fine. And one person said, "I wonder sometimes, though, if it wouldn't just be better to burn the whole thing to the ground and start over again." And the leader of the community said, "I think Karen needs a vacation." And it was just so true. It's like when we get too far strung out, it's like, what is the point of anything? And nothing seems to be working. I don't know what she was thinking, but so then let's just blow it all up and now we can build afresh. No. What we're really saying is I feel myself burned to the ground. Let me go lay down, and just then I can replenish myself. But Master says in this poem, I've been talking about moving away from, harmful sense pleasures, harmful to us is all, to positive, healthy ones. But he says, above all, let me not. And then what does he say? Be impure, be unspiritual, be any of these things that, we can superficially think happens. He says, no, let me not, or let me stay away from negativity, sarcasm, and cynicism. Exactly, cynicism. Isn't that funny? Because on the one hand, we can think, well, those things are harmless. Why? Well, because they happen every day. I get into negative moods all the time, and I seem to be just fine. But it's, that is the thing to watch out for. So in other words, I remember once sitting in a Sunday satsang in the audience, and I was so rapt by the speaker and the truths that were coming and so on. And then there was a person sort of sitting in front of me and to the side, and she was kind of looking at her watch, and there weren't cell phones back then, but I don't even remember exactly, but she was kind of, just kind of fussy, fussing about it, not fully engaged. And I said, she is so restless. She cannot enjoy the truths that are coming. And again, a negative critical thought. See how spiritual I am? And then I said, and something felt wrong, because before I was having joy, then as soon as I noticed this and passed judgment on it, suddenly I felt no joy. And I said, and I am so restless that I'm noticing her. She was distracted, but then I was distracted because who even cares what she's doing? Enjoy your purse or whatever it is. I'm here, and then the joy came back. You see, every time we have a negative thought, the heart shrinks a little bit. And I don't mean like watch out because it shrinks until nothing's left. I mean, we feel that. We go, ooh. I remember once I was in a satsang, and someone said, someone asked, Jyotish actually was there, he said, are there any questions? And someone said, what's the meaning of life? It was a kind of a new guest, kind of just like, you want a question? There's a question for you. And I remember he said something just like, well, okay, maybe we can start with something simpler. And everybody laughed. And I was there very new on the spiritual path and very experienced. So I thought. And so I just thought to myself, I would have said, to find God. Just push back that energy of making everything light. But though it may be true, my heart shrank a little bit because I wasn't meeting her. This is all theoretical anyway, but I wouldn't have been approaching her from where she was coming from. She was in kind of a joking mood, and why not let her joke stand? And then Jyotish replied much more appropriately, just in keeping the light energy going, because it helped open people up. And if, in any case, I was going to have you can even look in the mirror when I'm about to say a truth. It's like, no, you're not. Just look in the mirror. There's no truth in that. Even if our words are right, and this is one of the difficulties about being intelligent and also on the spiritual path, is very often we will be right in what we say. But if our attitude is wrong, then we're wrong. One person who was extremely clever and extremely strong in the teachings said, I began to realize in an argument, in using the teachings to prove that, no, this is why I'm right. The person said, I began to realize just like if I could hear, if my tone of voice was wrong, then I was wrong. Even if the words were accurate, I was wrong, coming at it with the wrong energy. And the wrong energy is always negative. In the sense that it doesn't always mean negative in the way we think of, angry or depressing or whatever. Negative means pulling us away from God. And so we can be negative towards ourselves, for example, and that's equally unhelpful. And every person is a child of God except me. Everybody should be forgiven and be born with and have patience with, but not me. No, there's no tolerance for my mistakes. We can feel towards ourselves. It's a possibility. You may not have this problem, and if so, that's fine. But what you'll see is basically, I think there's a little bit of a pendulum that happens for people on the spiritual path. That at first we think, well, now I'm finally on the spiritual path. I've got it all figured out. And it's such a relief to not have to deal with that crazy worldly consciousness that I used to have. And to a large extent, that's true. I'm not here to go ha 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 about that. It's absolutely true. In fact, the first question to ask about how should we meet our tests is, why do we have to have tests, especially if they're misery-making? But it's usually a test that put us on the spiritual path in the first place. Something that we faced in our life that was too much, that we realized, I need help. I need clarity. I need this is what I'm doing is not working. There must be something more. And that can be because of a great outward disaster that happened, or it can be simply because nothing happened. As I've shared with you, a friend of mine got the perfect house, the perfect husband, the perfect job, and after moving into her house, she looked around at the beautiful kitchen and just began to cry. Because she said, is this it? I have everything that you're supposed to have, and I'm still upset, I'm still miserable, I'm still, it's not giving me any joy. And so that itself can then be enough to put us on the spiritual path. Or, in some cases, it's a relatively, what most people would consider a minor, test. Especially when you're younger on the spiritual path and you get on the spiritual path because of some great suffering, and all the insensitive adults say, that's nothing, come on, little kid, and so on. It's like, but sometimes, as Master said, I think, or definitely Swamiji did, sometimes it takes just a touch of suffering to remind us of all those lifetimes of, I remember how this world doesn't work out. And even one little disappointment brings all of those lifetimes of memories back, and we say, Vaindam, I am going for God. And so without those tests, without those disappointments, without those discovering that 1 + 3 does not equal 7, or whatever it is, that we realize this world is not adding up to what we want, then that makes us go deeper. It makes us seek higher. So in a certain way, very truthfully, our tests we should be the most grateful for, because they woke us up. Otherwise, sleepwalking till the end of life, and then just have to start over again. So the tests, just because they're difficult, I remember saying once to my brother, just because something is difficult or uncomfortable doesn't mean it's wrong. He went, I have to think about that. Because he had been in a mode that if I were doing everything right, there would be no difficulty, there would be no discomfort. But if we're growing, it's going to be uncomfortable. It's going to be difficult because we're stretching and expanding. And so that inherently takes some difficulty. And in fact, Lahiri Mahashaya said, an easy life is not a victorious life. And so we want to meet tests, as Sri Yukteswarji said, meet each test pleasantly and overcome each trial cheerfully, which is wonderful. And I remember a friend of mine once said in a Sunday satsang, it's beautiful and it's true and it's impossible to follow. And it's not impossible to follow in this case, but it's quite difficult, because why don't we like tests? Well, as I was starting to say earlier, sometimes I think we swing on the pendulum in either direction. We get onto the spiritual path and we say, okay, now I've got everything figured out. I know the truth. I know what I'm supposed to do. I'm doing it and it's working. I mean, for example, often when we start meditating, we can have all kinds of spiritual experiences that are thrilling. And it's like, I read Autobiography of a Yogi, he had that, I want it too. And then we meditate and we have certain kinds of experiences and they come easily. And we think, ha-ha! As one disciple of Master said, the first time he practiced Kriya, he felt this energy shoot up his spine and he felt such bliss that he started weeping. And he said, gosh, I used to have a little bit of trouble with depression, but no problem anymore. I'll just do a few of these and we'll take care of it. But that experience did not continue for him uninterruptedly that way. But it can. Master said, that's all I do. He said, I practice a few times Kriya and I am in the Spirit. And he didn't say that to say, he said it because he's saying, and you can too. It really is that simple. And so if you want to meditate, sometimes this can happen in a meditation. I've got this problem, I've got this problem, I've got this problem. I'm sitting here, I should probably meditate. No, not yet. I want to get this problem solved before I meditate. I want to get my mind calm before I meditate. Okay, maybe for 5 minutes, but meditation makes your mind calm. It's the ego trying to talk us out of meditating. Oh, you don't want to meditate with this consciousness, not yet. First, uplift your consciousness, then you can meditate. It's just like, that's what meditation does. Just say, stop it, and meditate. There's that Zen koan, I forget what it was. There was some puzzle. They asked the disciple to pass his test about, they gave him a glass, and I forget what, I think it was, is the glass half empty or half full? It was filled up or something. And he looked at it and then he just broke the glass. And they said, very good, you've passed. In other words, it was sort of like it was an impossible question. The solution was just to break through it. Similarly, in sort of ancient fables, I forget, there's the Gordian knot, which was a knot in a rope that was so complicated that it couldn't be untied, and every time you pulled this side, the side would get tighter. I'm sure you faced such a knot in your life before. And so I think it was Alexander, if I've got my facts right, he just came with a sword and went and just cut the thing in half, finished. And so very often our tests can be overcome that way, not in their own terms, not in the terms of Maya and ego and so on, but just meditate, get your consciousness right, you see the answer. Or the problem ceases to exist, especially if it's a worry or a fear about something that might happen but isn't happening. Then we meditate, I'm not worried about it anymore. And since nothing has happened anyway, that's the most ridiculous thing about worry and fear. Swami said fear comes from our attachment to the way things are and fearing that they might change. In other words, not accepting that things will change. They do change. What if this happens? And so meanwhile, we can cook ourselves up, and I speak from personal experience, in a big juicy fear, soup, or a fear rasam. And nothing has happened. And nothing is going to happen, probably. And yet we've just been sitting cooking. And so really, it's just over nothing. Usually, if you fear something and then it finally happens, you go, that's all it was? That was nothing compared to what I imagined. And what did we imagine? It's hard to even put into words. I fear that it will be bad. Not like I fear that this exact thing, well, if that exact thing happened, then this is what I would try to do to handle it. Fear also gets us by being vague and shadowy, and no matter what you do, you won't be able to win. That's basically something that happens with a fear. Now, going back to this concept of the swinging back and forth, which I'm trying to get back to, that we can feel so confident on the spiritual path that it can start to build a bit of a superiority complex. Just that things are going well, I know what I'm doing, I know the rules, I'm done with that old life, I'm done with those old habits, and I have a bit of wisdom now that I'm happy to share with anyone who would like it. All these things that come. And then we hit a wall. Either because we have missed some point, and so we stumble over a landmine that we didn't notice was there, or we just suddenly, the old habits suddenly come back and we think, I thought I was done with this. Excuse me, we're done here. And the old habit comes in and grabs us, as Swamiji was describing in the reading. Or simply, we just find that the joy disappears. Hey, I used to do Hong Sa and felt joyful every time, and now I don't. And hey, I used to do whatever this is, energization, or I used to it used to just give me a thrill, and now it doesn't. In other words, our commitment was partly just because it was enjoyable. And so then God says, okay, now will we do it even if it's not enjoyable? I don't mean it's painful and miserable. I just mean that joy suddenly gets taken away. And then we can fall into despair for any of these reasons and swing from I've got it all figured out to I've got nothing figured out. And then, once we have a new miracle, like suppose we take Kriya initiation like that disciple, and okay, now Kriya works, now that will always work, and then we swing back again. Now, it's always going to be perfect. In our attachment, we can get into these extremes. And Swamiji said you don't want to go for broke. You don't want to be completely, fully committed in something. For example, suppose you're in a deep meditation, you say, okay, now today, because of my deep meditations, I'm going to meditate till 6 hours. In fact, Swamiji, I'll just tell the story. He had this experience. He said, I was feeling so close to breathlessness that I decided one morning I'm going to meditate until it happens. And he said, and it went on, and he kept trying harder and harder. He said, not realizing at the time that the more you try, the more tense you are, the more it recedes from you. And this was, of course, very on the spiritual path. And he said he went on for 9 hours. And then he said at the end of it, he had to admit that it didn't work. And then it took him a long time to get his courage back up to try again. Because there was always that thought, you tried and it didn't happen. And he said, therefore, on the spiritual path and in life, even if we're going for it for a test, always, he said, hold a little bit of courage and reserve to say, and if it doesn't work out, fine. Have a little bit of detachment that you may not know exactly how this one is going to play out. So you have something to fall back on. Because he said otherwise people can get so discouraged that they end up leaving the path. And so even if that's not always true for us, we can get so discouraged that then we're just kind of in a mood for 7 years. And it's all because of that we went all out and it didn't happen. But we have to remember that karma is there and it's a real thing. But it's not there to keep us down. We're working through it to overcome it. But its time may not be up yet. And on a certain level that doesn't even matter. Because if we're moving in the right direction, as he was saying, if you're putting out positive energy towards good habits and not feeding the bad habits, then the good will eventually take over. And furthermore, everything is dual. So in the sense that even the worst thing, the worst circumstance, the worst habit, the worst situation, always has a positive side to it too. A good thing to it too. And so we may find, as even Master said, your greatest weakness can end up becoming your greatest strength. And it's like, well, okay, but how could that be true? So just imagine, someone who struggles with schooling and education and always has to work so hard to figure things out because it just doesn't come naturally. Well, he or she would probably make a really good teacher because they could relate to the students who are struggling. In school, I never really struggled that much. I thought I did, but I didn't until I was in graduate school. And then I finally hit a subject that was just too hard. And it was a combination of things to demoralize me. One was that the professor was saying, we're going to do a novel thing, we're going to teach without a textbook. And so it was like, great, but then there was nothing. If we didn't understand what he said, and if we didn't get it in class, and he wasn't extremely clear, and he said, and to some extent I'm learning this stuff as I go along, and, he knew most of it, but so it was just like his clarity or my lack of absorption, I couldn't get it. So then some of the students found out secretly what book he was using for himself, and so we got the book too. And it was written by, I forget the man's first name, but Professor Ahuja. So we were, oh yes, so the Indians in the class, yes, very good, very good. And even from the textbook, it was really hard. And what made it worse was there was a student in the class who had done his undergraduate thesis in the same subject, in flow networks. And so he was just in the class always, 75, pre-flow push algorithm, just shouting out the answers while I was just... And I just couldn't get it. And they would also do things. There's a certain algorithm that you can explain by lifting up different parts of the pipe so that the water flows to the bottom. And so people would start to do this. And so when I would ask, but how does it work? And they would start to go, and I remember just thinking to myself, don't do that one more time. What does this mean? Were people always going... I was getting so frustrated because my mind just couldn't grasp it. And for me, then, school became hard. I had never had difficulty. Like I said, I thought I had, but this was just, I don't get it. I don't understand it. And so then I began studying the book, and then I decided, well, I could either, quit, or I could stay in the class, and I wasn't going to quit because it was in my major, and the professor was my thesis advisor, so I couldn't really quit. So I just kept studying it, and slowly it started to make sense. But I had to go to all the professor's office hours. I had to read the book, the same page 500 times just to get something to sink in. And then later, years later, when I was a school teacher and trying to explain to a kid how to subtract fractions or add fractions, which is so strange that adding fractions is harder than multiplying them, but anyway, that I could understand. They said, I just don't get it. I say, yeah, I know how that feels. I never knew how that felt before. And so I, could say, just be patient, let's try it a different way and so on. But I had much more empathy because I had gone through it. And in that class, I was definitely one of the weakest students at first. Because, a lot of other people would go, does this make any sense to you? Well, kind of. It didn't make any sense. So in other words...
still got all A's,
I said I started out as one of the weakest students. I didn't end up there. No, but the point was that weakness turned into a strength in being able to help other people. And so similarly, that you will find these things in yourself that as things that you thought were like the greatest curse end up being the greatest blessing, if only because they've made us stronger. Sometimes in our families, we find that we don't necessarily feel understood, or we don't necessarily feel supported in things that are important to us individually. And you look at this other happy family where everything seems to be going fine. Meanwhile, remember, they're looking at your family thinking everything seems to be going fine for you. And that's literally true. Master said, if you could see, don't be jealous of anyone. He said, because if you could see past the eyeballs to the karma, he said, you would be very glad to have your own karma and be yourself. And it doesn't mean that you're the best, because of course the same person is looking at you past your eyeballs and going, whoa, okay, never mind. I'm happy to be myself and not you. But why? Because that person may be strong in something that we need to become strong in, and so maybe we are envious of that. But then they may have to learn all these other things that we've already learned. And so, I don't want to go through that again. Our tests are custom tailored for us. Everyone's is. So remember, if somebody you see seems to not be having tests, they are. Or if they're having tests and you think, doesn't seem so big to me, that test is right for them. And so usually an inability to accept others as they are stems from our own inability to accept ourselves as we are. And they go hand in hand. The more patient we are with others, the more patient we become with ourselves. Or conversely, the more patient we become with ourselves, the more easier it is to be patient with others. But don't try to hold people to your standard, and don't be held to theirs either. You know what you're doing. You know it's good for you. You know it's right. And so stick with that. But as I was saying, We may not feel fully supported and connected to our families, and yet, I mean, if that's the case, and yet, sometimes it's that very sense of disconnection that drives us onto the spiritual path. And then when we find that spiritual family, then two things happen. We say, okay, here are the other aliens on this planet just like me. I was wondering where we were all gathering, because I don't seem to be from here, but neither do you all, and it makes sense. We can all relate. As sometimes someone would joke at Ananda, most of us who come to Ananda have been the black sheep of the family. You know, the black sheep is the one that doesn't quite fit in, or the one that everyone's like, why don't you get married, or whatever it is. And so we were saying at Ananda, all the black sheep get together. And so then everybody's a black sheep, and so everybody fits in together, and it all works out well. And so the other side of it is that lack of connection drove us to seek a deeper meaning. And it can be the case that if you have a super comfortable family, as happened to one person I knew, it was very hard for her to move forward on the spiritual path on one level, because she kept just missing the comfort of her family, where it wasn't just emotional comfort, it was also outer comfort. Everything was easy, everything worked, there was always harmony, and not a lot of incentive to grow. And I don't mean to say that she was lucky or unlucky again. That was, everybody's tests are custom made for them. But your tests are given to you. All of our tests are just to help us to gain strength. And that's why it's important when facing a test to remember Swamiji's saying, as when he was trying to overcome smoking, I haven't yet succeeded. Every time he would go back to smoking, he would say, I haven't yet succeeded. And if only we knew that if that was, for example, a problem for you, 5 more cigarettes and you're done. Okay, no problem. We just don't know when it's going to end, and that's what can make us a little bit afraid. But we know it is going to end. If we're holding back our energy from it, and if we're putting out positive energy, it will end. All karma is finite. That's it. And furthermore, all of us have the destiny to go to God. It's the only destination. All the freeways end up there. So we can drive even in circles forever, but eventually we'll get drawn back there. So there's really no choice, except how long it takes and how much hair of ours we pull out in frustration along the way. And so just keep that in mind. Every test that comes to you, as Sri Yukteswar said, meet it pleasantly and cheerfully. Oh good, another lesson for me to become wiser. Another test of my detachment. Another experience that if I go through, maybe it will help me to relate to others better, or be able to help them if they go through that. Oh good, God is noticing me because all of these difficulties have come. You know, sometimes if 2 or 3 or 4 things are going wrong in your life, it's upsetting. But if 5 things go wrong, then you know it has to be God. Because random probabilities would only give you a few things wrong, not everything wrong. And so that has to have some divine intervention in there, making it happen. So each test makes us stronger. And I don't mean it in the way that I think Nietzsche or somebody said, whatever doesn't kill me makes me stronger. I don't mean like a grim kind of, okay, I'm getting stronger with each of these tests. It's not that way. Gaining more understanding, gaining more patience, gaining more surrender, more openness to God. And then Master also said, whatever comes of itself, let it come. And so if it has come, then just accept Divine Mother is still watching. And she sent this to me for some reason, let me try to understand. And then finally, as Babaji said, as Lahiri Mahashaya said to his disciples, solve every problem with Kriya. And that sometimes is a difficult teaching. I mean, first get Kriya. But if you don't have Kriya yet, you can generalize his advice to solve every problem with meditation. But just to say, why? Because does it mean that we are, have feelings to process and emotions to understand, but just do Kriya and suppress them? No, it doesn't mean that. But if we raise our energy, if we get ourselves in alignment, either things will change around us, or we will change inside, and then it doesn't matter so much. Swamiji had an experience where a temple that he had built collapsed. And he walked away from the building site and so on, and he was just thinking to himself, okay, Divine Mother, I built this temple and it collapsed, and I built it for you, and so you chose to knock it down, but just help me to understand, And he said suddenly he felt so much joy that he began weeping, and he said, why didn't you take the other buildings too? Because he could just feel God's presence, and that's it. Then everything makes sense. In another test that he faced, where a friend had left him in a very difficult situation, and he was frustrated not only with the friend, but also with the fact that this was happening. And he said, okay, God, I'm tired of running over this in my mind. Let me just ask you to take it from me and show me the truth of the situation. And suddenly, he felt again this joy, and he said, it wasn't that I saw how wonderful it was that my friend had abandoned me, and how it was so perfect that now I had to work 3 times as hard. But he said, it was rather that I saw it from God's point of view, and instantly, actually, I began to feel compassion for my friend, for the circumstances that drove her to feel that she had to leave, and truthfully, for some of the bad karma she was accruing because she had made a promise and then she had broken it. And she didn't have to in that sense. And so he immediately felt that compassion for her. In fact, went to visit her. And she was ill at the time. And he was just, how are you and how can I help you? And he said, he did it very sincerely. He didn't say, how can I help you? He just felt all that joy that, look, it doesn't even matter. So in that way, solve every problem through Kriya also means if we just feel peace, if we feel calmness, then it doesn't really matter what the circumstances are. It ceases to be a problem. It's just a situation or a task or a period that we're going through. So, above all, though, don't get discouraged when something doesn't work out the way you want, or you've tried for the 51st time and it's still not working. Just remember, each step is bringing you closer to victory. When you were learning how to write English letters, you didn't get one shot. Okay, Sharmila, try writing S. Here you go, you're 4 years old, you got one shot at it. Maybe I'm sure you didn't, but maybe she makes it backwards. That's it! Nope, sorry, better luck next lifetime. We don't get one shot at something. You know how to write now, right? And you do even remember all the struggles you had with T and with K. I'm in English, that is to say. No, it's just, you learn it. It's all we're doing now. We're just learning these things, and each little failed attempt is leading us to okay, now I see the S doesn't go that way, it goes this way, fine. That's it. That's all it is, no matter how great a tragedy it seems or how big a failure. It's just a learning. And so how, though, to have that attitude? Keep a little bit of strength in reserve. Don't fully give it all in this direction. And then we'll just see. Keep a little bit in reserve, and then also be detached. Just say, okay, Lord, I'm going to try like crazy to grow, but if it doesn't work out, you and I can just sit at home together in the rain, and it's just fine. God bless you.